All right, folks, what are the worst cities for Black Americans? The financial news company 24/7 Wall Street established an index based on economic disparities between Black and white residents in several American cities. Here are the 5 with the biggest racial gaps. The top of the list, Erie, Pennsylvania, followed by Peoria, Illinois, then Milwaukee, Waukesha, West Allis, Wisconsin, metropolitan area, Racine, Wisconsin, and the Niles, Benton Harbor metro area in Michigan. So I wanted to break this thing down with our economic folks, Dr. Julianne Malveaux, economist and president emerita of Bennett College, Dr. Bill Spriggs, professor of economics at Howard University, Deborah Owens, financial expert and wealth coach. All right, folks, so none of these are in the South. Here we are at this point 50 years ago. Dr. King was talking about the Poor People's Campaign. And it was a shock to many people when they realized the economic deprivation that took place in Watts after the riots, what took place with what happened in Newark, and then in New York City, what happened in these Midwestern places as well. There's this assumption that, oh no, these are just a Southern thing. And what's happening to Black folks economically happens all across the country, and we're seeing this thing Northeast, Midwest parts of America.
No, that's a little misleading. Remember, these are cities with gaps. So in absolute terms, you are still worse in the South. What it actually highlights is the myth of the white working class and why that's wrong. Yeah. So what you get is that the gaps in the South are smaller because those policies hurt Black and white workers.
Right.
So in absolute poverty and absolute incarceration rates, you're worse in the South, by far. In terms of absolute...
You mean in the South they lock up white folks too?
They lock up white folks too. The disparity is in the North. It's the disparity.
And the other piece of it, Roland,
is the disparity that matters. And remember, the image was when these jobs left, it's the white working class that was hurt. But what's clear is these are cities that were greatly affected by jobs leaving because of trade. Mm-hmm. The decline of union membership, it's not manufacturing, it's the decline of union membership that hurt.
And that was the point I was just about to make about the unions, where we weren't necessarily in line. I mean, when you talk about last hired, first fired, I mean, we were not in line. We weren't in some of these union jobs. We were prevented from being in some of these union jobs. Or we were the last hired.
In Erie and Milwaukee, Blacks are more likely to be in unions than whites. These are industrial cities, and it's the access to those jobs that created opportunity for Blacks in those cities.
So you're saying the layoffs hit us harder? Well, I'm saying the same thing, except for a different kind of a timepiece. And then if you look at Milwaukee, the other thing about Milwaukee that is so startling is the incarceration. Black folks are like 100 times more likely, not 10 times, but 100 times more likely to be incarcerated than white people are.
Deborah, why this matters is because, again, and the reason I set it up that way is that we have created in our minds that, to Bill's point, oh, all these conversations, the white working class, oh, what they're going through, and all of these stories after 2016 where we've got to pay attention to the flyover states. We're in the flyover states.
Well, I think
let's not act like we're not there. Now, you have these places all throughout Pennsylvania and Michigan where it's 90, 95, 98% white. But we are there too.
We are, and I thought what was really interesting in those statistics was the amount of Black population in many was below 20%, right? And so what you can, it was like 12, 14, 15%. So on average, 11 to 12%. And I think what that really highlights is mobility, right? And how social capital plays a role in that. If you, and I'm from the Midwest, Detroit, and so if you look at Benton Harbor was one of those cities named in that, as one of the worst cities. And I think that what's really interesting in looking at this most recent election is what you saw, you're talking about the whole low-income white voter, what you saw is what was able to really move those elections in the Democrats' favor was the fact that Black folks came out, right? And so what you begin to see is that it's more racial resentment, which many of those studies, many of the studies have shown. If you look at the turnout and the amount of people who, white voters who didn't vote Democratic, they were not low-income workers. To a large degree, they were suburbanites. But I think coming back to this study, what you see in why these are the worst cities for black folks to live in is not only industrial, flight. Many of them were at one time probably employed, whether it was auto factories or some type of manufacturing as a result of auto factories. What you also see is the limited upward mobility for blacks in these cities where there are so few blacks. I think that was what was most, to me, what was most evident in what those statistics talked about in just the disparity for blacks.
The high unemployment rates in some of these cities are quite stunning. When you look at an overall black unemployment rate of 7.3%, and you see some of these cities, you're talking 14, 15, even hitting on 20, 25%. I mean, that's just amazing to me. The other thing that's amazing, frankly, is the extent to which, as you talk about these flyover places, you look at Wisconsin. Hillary Clinton did not go to Wisconsin. She did not put her melanin-deprived hind parts into Wisconsin at all. And so, yes, she deserved to lose, given that. These folks, I wish there were, these folks who had done this study had done more. Deborah's point about social capital is so well taken, but about what kind of social ambiance these black folks are living in.
And Bill, I love the Republicans who say, oh, these are Democratic cities. Pull that graphic up, y'all. I need you to leave it up. Number 5, Michigan has a Republican governor. Number 4, Wisconsin. Number 3, Wisconsin has a Republican governor. Number 2, Illinois has a Republican governor. And Pennsylvania, I believe, has a Democratic governor. Okay, 3 out of the 5 Republican governors. So the issue here, now you're dealing with state policy. Now you're dealing with state economic policy. Now you're dealing with, of course, Governor Scott Walker in Wisconsin, who wants to destroy unions as well. So, Bill, when we talk about that, it's still very interesting. All of these white union workers who voted for Trump, and they still haven't seen the job. Look at Carrier, what's going on as well. Carrier cut the deal.
That was a Trump deal.
Cut the deal, and then now they're moving all the jobs. Didn't even last a year.
Yeah, so first, let's be clear, union voters voted Democratic. That's the majority of them. But yes, you're exactly right. These states have implemented policies that emulate the South. So these Republican governors are doing the same policies that will repress all workers. But, you know, this is amazing that these are cities that are 8%, 7% black in the list. And so it does speak to the inability in those environments for blacks to work their way into the job network that would let them suffer less than what went on in the downturn.
And I do remember
Milwaukee, Racine, both of those are communities that are suffering in terms of economic mobility. Their mobility looks more like the South. In Michigan, economic mobility is just down. Minneapolis is not on the top 5, but Minneapolis was on their list.
It was on the top 10.
Top 10.
I think it was number 7.
And that was surprising because that's a city with more mobility, but blacks are locked out, and because their numbers.
What I would say is, okay, we were looking at the top 5 cities, but if we look at all urban cities, whether there is large African American population, what we will see is that unemployment by African Americans is, there's a wide gap. I mean, if you were going to Baltimore, if you were to go into Detroit, if you would go into Chicago.
Well, there's a national gap in the unemployment rate, and the things that's happened in some of these cities is even greater than the national gap. The gap is 2 to 1, but when you're looking at some of these cities, it's more like 5 to 1, 6 to 1. And so the situation is even worse than it is from the national perspective. The incomes as well. In Milwaukee, the average person earns $24,000 a year, average black person, that is, which is about $15,000 less than the average income for black people overall.
All right, folks, I am out of time. And I wanted to have this panel primarily because, obviously, last chance the three of them will be on this show as well. And we made this point when we launched the show. Tell me how many times when you turn on MSNBC, CNN, and Fox, when you actually see black folks talk about the economics, especially black economists. So that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have two on. Of course, Deborah's been doing our Wealthy Youth segment as well. A lot of you have been so helped by that Wealthy Youth segment with your emails and your social media comments as well. So, folks, we certainly appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Can we get a high five here?
This show is too important. And this year is too important to America, and this show is too important to making sure we're informed. This is too important.
And for our young people, I mean, how often do you actually see, you know, when we were in grad school, it was just us. And just us by ourselves. And how often do you see that? And, you know, young folks say, what do black economists do? We're telling y'all.
There you go. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Roland.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Weekdays on TV One.
I will never lie to you.
Oh, my God.
Roland Martin.
He doesn't want to talk to us. He wants to ignore us.
Uncensored.
Hell no.
That ain't gonna cut it, boo.
Unapologetic.
No, that is fundamentally false. You are wrong.
Unfiltered.
He wants an America where we all look alike. He ain't talking about black people.
Unrelenting.
You better go work out, because you got a fight on your hands.
NewsOne Now with Roland Martin. Weekdays at 7 a.m. on TV One.